Thank you for joining me. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about the task that Robert Nozick sets himself in attempting to derive and justify the existence of the state. So if you recall, Nozick thinks that in a state of nature, we will naturally, as human beings, gravitate into mutual protective associations so as to offload in more efficient ways upon a common group those difficult tasks and responsibilities that we find ourselves encumbered with as property owners, including especially protection of our property against natural disasters and in particular against the wiles and machinations of our fellow human beings. Now, Nozick wants to justify the existence of the state. This is, he thinks, the key question of political philosophy. Why have a state at all? Why not just have anarchy? And Nozick thinks that it is imperative that we justify the existence of the state by means of processes that do not violate those moral constraints which we naturally possess, those rights which we have. Nozick doesn't have an extensive backstory about how we come to possess these rights, but suffice to say, for our purposes here, he does think that we have such rights. And Nozick is also confident in answering the question, how does the state come about, that it is possible for the state to come about without violating the rights of persons. First of all, it's important to recognize what the state accomplishes. If we think about Nozick's mutual protective association, what it does is it achieves certain tasks which we ourselves would find very cumbersome and difficult to accomplish. If we were always trying to protect our property from each other, then we would never have time for enjoyments or for other pursuits. And so Nozick thinks that the state is able to accomplish these, but it must accomplish these by means of some degree of redistribution. And redistribution concerns him a lot, because redistribution requires the state to seize assets from the citizens, redistribute them to others, and to take what the citizens naturally possess by right by virtue of their property acquisition. Nozick thinks that it is justifiable, however, for the state to redistribute. We could, of course, imagine a state that doesn't redistribute, so a state that maybe is kind of like a company in that it only serves to provide the kinds of services that the clientele directly pay for, might be just such a state. I've read before about fire departments that operate in this way. In some rural townships, fire departments operate on a pay-as-you-go basis, where persons can receive fire protection, the guarantee that the fire department will come and put out any fire at their house or building if they pay a monthly dues fee. And if you pay that fee and fire takes place in your house, the fire department will come. But if you don't pay your monthly fee and fire envelops your house, then I have read in, I guess it's humorous but tragic at the same time, the fire department will come and they will stand in front of your house in these townships and they will protect other houses around you who have paid their dues from starting to burn as your house is burning and as embers are flying this way and that. But they won't put the fire out at your house. This is an example of a clientele sort of a state that does not redistribute in ways that are unjust and that violate the consent of persons. But the full state is redistributive. A mutual protection association requires us to pay dues in the form of taxes as members of the state, and these dues are then redistributed to help in the protection of other persons who aren't paying dues, at least not to the extent that we are paying them. There are different grades of taxation. Nozick thinks it is imperative to be able to justify the existence of a state that redistributes our goods and services, and especially the labor of our hands, the labor of our minds, in these kinds of ways. Nozick thinks that The way that justification can come about is by means of his famous invisible hand explanation. He thinks that what justifies it is that it is rational for us to participate in a system in which the redistribution of our property takes place. In consenting to operate within such a system, we are consenting to redistribution, even if that redistribution involves seizing property, the labor of our hands, giving the benefits of that property seizure to others who did not earn it, and in turn protecting their property, even if they did not necessarily pay to the same extent that we paid our dues. Nozick thinks that this is justifiable because in acting for our own self-interest we consent to such an arrangement, and it is the process of consent that makes the state an organization that does not violate our individual rights. I'll talk a little bit more about Nozick's view on the correct way of approaching social justice and distribution tasks in another video, but for now it is imperative that we understand that Nozick thinks that the state is a mutual protection association writ large that has a monopoly on violence within a particular geographical territory, and that the state is justified in doing the kinds of redistributive and coercive actions that it does. It does not violate our rights in doing so because we consent to the operations of the state by means of our participation as such in a mutual protective association.